are starting for bring at about 10 o'clock. So by the time we say hello, it'll be late. Okay, so Azoi. There's a Sicha on the Indian of bitachon, trust, as opposed to emunah, which is faith. That's what's the difference between them. And it's actually even shaykh the next week's parsha, right? So you can feel good that not next week's, not this week's, next week's. So you can feel good you're learning the parsha. V'yigdal Moshe v'yitzel achiv. Moshe grew up and he went out to see his brothers. What happened? Moshe, little boy hidden away by his mother, finally couldn't hide him away anymore, put him in a little boat. Bisya Bas Parai found him and took care of him. First he went back to his mother to be nursed for a while, and then he grew up in the house of Parai. At the age of about 15 or 16 or so, it says he grew up and he went out to see his brothers. He went to see his Yidden, what's happening with the Yidden. And what did he see, amongst other things? V'yar ish mitzri makeh. He saw an Egyptian beating up a Yid, and he, Yaches a Mitzri, he hit the Mitzri, killed him, buried him, looked here and here to see if there was anybody around, first before he killed him. He looked here and here to see if anybody was around in simple pshat. Rashi says that he looked to see if there were any positive descendants of this guy in the future, if he were to stay alive, and then he said no, so he killed him. Well, he was hitting a Yid. So then he went out the second day, and what did he find? He found two Jews fighting. Dasan and Avira, two famous Jewish creeps, right? So, creeps deraisa. He said to the Rasha, why are you hitting your friend? Even though he just lifted up his hand, he hadn't hit him yet. This Sicha is in Chelek Lamed Vav of Lekutei Sichas. In Lamed Aleph, the first Sicha, is dafka on that Indian of three different positions as to the Indian of hitting another person. Because he just lifted up his hand, he hadn't hit him yet. And yet, Moshe says, why are you hitting him? V'yemer, and they said to him, one of them, it's singular, Halargeni kasher agdas a Mitzri, you're going to kill me like you killed the Mitzri? Yeah, I assume that's the one who's lifted up his hand to hit the other one. Right, you're going to kill me like you killed the Egyptian? And now the line that's very important, we're going to see Rashi on this line. Yidam Moshe was afraid, V'yemer, and he said, Achein neida hadavar. Behold, the thing is known. Now, simple pshat, you would assume the thing is that he killed the Mitzri. Ve'yishma Parai, and Parai heard v'yavakesh lareges Moshe, and he wanted to kill Moshe. Right? Moshe went back to the palace. He did not run away. Went back to the palace. Parai heard about it, wanted to kill Moshe, and so what happened? Ve'yivrak Moshe, and Moshe ran away. We all know the story. Right, Moshe ran away, and then he came back to Mitzrayim 64 years later. He came back to Mitzrayim 65 years later. He came back to Mitzrayim after HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him to go back to Mitzrayim after the prophetic experience at the Sneh. What Moshe did in those 65 years, he was a king in Africa for a while, and then he moved to Midian, and he got married. He met his wife, he got married, he had a couple of kids, and the rest is history, as they say.
What does the Gimel Vav mean that keeps repeating itself?
Gomer, etc.
Okay.
When you're quoting psukim, you say Gomer. When you're quoting other things, it's usually Chafal, V'chulei, both etc. Okay? Okay, so Rashi. You ready for some Rashi? You have to keep it straight. Ubapedish Rashi. Rashi says, Al Vayira Moshe, that Moshe was afraid. Kosav, he writes, Kipshutai. Kipshutai means in context. In Rashi, Pshat is context, not literal. We talked about this when we were learning in JSP, some of us. Rashi is not a literal pshat of the Torah. He is a contextual pshat of the Torah, and Rashi uses Chazal, in this one he doesn't yet. He uses Chazal to say pshat. Every now and then he'll bring a medrash and call it a medrash, which is telling us, I am not saying pshat, this is something else. This is a non-contextual explanation of the verse. Why is he telling us that? One of two reasons. Either to support the pshat he said, which in this case is obviously not the case, or to teach us information that he thinks it's important that we know, that is not available al derech pshat. It's not contextual, and he thinks it's important for us to know this. Having streaming issues. Remember we had these for a long time, and then I just gave up. And then we did it on WhatsApp for a while. When did it start again? Elul, maybe it started working?
Oh.
For quite a few months.
What about the Bangladeshis?
What?
What about the Bangladeshis?
Yeah, so no, we just put it on. Oh, that's true. They didn't get it. They didn't get it on that. That's true. Look, maybe they were the ones causing it. I mean, maybe they got in cahoots with the Houthis, and they were doing cyberspace terrorism, and the Houthis are busy sending the odd bomb, and Zell. I mean, the Bangladeshis and the Houthis, they're like this. I mean,
It's true. Show. He didn't read it. He loves.
They've been so faithful after all this time. They've been so faithful. No. There's 3 guys in Iowa who just love it. Clem, Jed, and Harry. There's a Harry in there in Iowa too. Okay, so now Rashi says in Pshat, in Medrash, Da'agloi, he was worried, al shadra Yisrael, that he saw amongst the Jewish people, Rashayim dilatorim, he saw, Rashayim dilatorim, this means evil people, Dasan Aviram. Amar, he said, Moshe said to himself, Me'ata shema einam ruim ligoyel. Now perhaps they're not, from this, they're perhaps not fit to be redeemed. Wow. Now that's obviously not the context, right? That's not what's going on in the story. In the story, Moshe is afraid because they just said, you're going to kill us like you killed the Mitzri. So obviously the pshat, the context is he was afraid that he was going to get caught. Rashi says, non-contextually, quoting the Medrash, there's another fear of Moshe. The fear that the Jewish people aren't worthy of redemption because they can't get along. Dasan Aviram. Well, okay. So the Rebbe says, Yesh la'ayim. We have to look into this carefully. My timer, what's the reason, lo histapek Rashi, that Rashi didn't suffice, but Perush HaKosev, in the explanation of the verse Kepshute. Simple pshat. Sheyare lenafshe. He was afraid for his soul. Kaven shenoidev v'nisparsim adavar, since it was now known and publicized, this thing, shahada is a mitzvah, that he killed the mitzvah. Why not suffice with that? And what did Rashi do in addition to that, which seems superfluous? Vehevi games Perush HaMedrash also brought the Perush HaMedrash sheda'ag, that he was afraid, shema ein ruim liga, that perhaps they're not fit for geula. She'ein le'remez b'kra. There's no hint of that in the pasuk. You read this pasuk, it doesn't seem to be that that's his issue. Ubefrat, particularly. Could we get the doctor a copy, please? Particularly, Shelafi Perush Zeh, based on this explanation, B'viyira Moshe, when Moshe was afraid, Tzrichim lahoitzi gam hemshech haKosev. We also have to take the continuation of the pasuk. V'yemer achei neida davar.
Sorry.
I'm just going to. V'yemer achei neida davar, that this thing is known. Midei pshute. Take that out of context also. If I'm going to explain the first half of the verse out of context, then I'm going to have to explain the second half also, at least in line with what I said in the Medrash in the first half. Right? And obviously the simple pshat, Yechein neida davar, what's the davar? The davar is that he killed the mitzvah. That's the pshat. Right? The kai, that it's relevant to midei pshute. Take that also out from pshat. Dekai al harigas mitzri, that's relevant to the killing of the mitzri. V'hu atam, and that's the reason liyarasa shel Moshe. That's the reason for Moshe's fear. Ula Farshay, and Rashi explains it based the second medrash that Rashi brings. Be'inyan Acher explains it in another way. That's more in line with the medrash. Shalochin gam sham, as therefore also there, maybe Rashi brings la achrei haperish, after he says first k'mashma'oi, as it seems, meaning simple pshat. That what's now known that he killed the Mitzri. Gam, Rashi brings another perish. He brings another medrash. Gam is perish a medrash. Noideli hadavar. It's now known to me this thing shayisi tomelav that I was always wondering about. Ma chatu Yisrael. What did the Yidden do wrong? Liers nirdim bavedus parach, such that they were downtrodden in this difficult slavery. And what did he just see? He saw two Jews weren't getting along. So he sees, maybe Chas v'shalom, they deserve all this. So he learned two things. For the simple pshat is the pshat. Interesting enough, the Rabbi will point out, Rashi brings the pshat first. He does bring a pshat. He doesn't just bring the medrash, medrashay. And he doesn't bring the medrash as pshat because it's not pshat. It's not context. Right? Usually Rashi quotes medrashim. 95% of Rashi and Chumash is a direct quote of Chazal medrash on the pasuk. The Ramban thinks that Rashi is by definition not saying pshat. Why? Because pshat is what you think subjectively based on your understanding of the context and words as they're used in Chumash and etc. Tanakh, etc. Weather patterns in Egypt, whatever. The Ramban uses all sorts of things. You just say pshat, you say the subjective understanding of the pasuk. Rashi they both have an interesting question regarding pshat, and it is interesting, and there's a musar haskel to the question itself, and that is, why in the world would I say pshat? Who cares? As we talked about a little bit in the JSP. If I want to know what Torah B'Chsav means, I look in Torah Peh. Torah Shabbat Peh is the Eibishter's explanation of Torah B'Chsav. It was given to Moshe on Har Sinai. Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe L'Sadar Yeshua. What Torah is that? Torah Shabbat Peh. Torah B'Chsav Moshe gave to everybody. The Torah that Moshe taught, the Torah that Kadosh Baruch Hu taught Moshe gave just to Yeshua. That was Torah Shabbat Peh, the tradition, the oral tradition. That was passed on generation after generation. Okay, so that is the authoritative, stamped by God explanation of the written Torah. So if I want to know what the written Torah is, I just sit with 8 medrashim open around me and I read the medrashim on the Torah, because that's what the Torah means. So therefore the question arises, why in the world would I say pshat? Who cares? Rashi's answer to that question is, you're right. There is no reason to say pshat. And all I'm going to do is quote Torah Shabbat Peh's understanding of the Torah in context, and that's called pshat. That's Rashi's pshat. Rashi doesn't say anything subjective. Very, very rarely says anything that's Rashi's idea. Rashi quotes Chazal. Right? Why? Well, because my ideas don't matter. Why? They might be interesting, but they might not be true. And I'm not interested in interesting, I'm interested in truth. And where do I find truth? In the Torah. The Torah is true. So I'm just going to quote the objective truth as it explains these verses in context. And that's what Rashi did. 95% of Rashi is a quote of Chazal. We saw it when we were learning that story of Yosef and Binyamin. We just noticed that twice Rashi quoted Megillah. Right? Okay, these medrashim that Rashi is quoting here and telling us this isn't pshat, this is medrash. He's going out of his way to say this is not pshat. I'm not telling you pshat. The pshat is kepshute, kemashmoi. That's the pshat. The context is, well, it just makes perfect sense in context. You don't need me to explain anything. Okay, but for whatever reason, Rashi brings these medrashim. Okay, as extra. The Ramban thinks that no. There is a reason to say pshat, and what's that? To involve my intellect in the holy words of the Torah. But it might not be true what I say. It might be brilliant, but it doesn't have to be true. Brilliance and truth are not synonymous, right? Okay, so I want to know the truth. So what does the Ramban do? He's the first Parshan who did this. He was followed by many after, especially in his school, Beit Bachaya. But the Ramban writes the pshat, but then he'll quote Medrash, and he'll often quote Kabbalah, And what will you have to do when you learn the Medrash? See how the Medrash supports the Ramban's Pshat. The idea in the Medrash supports the Ramban's Pshat. The Ramban wants you to see that his basic idea is rooted in absolute truth. How he's learning the words, okay, so that's his subjective understanding of how to read the words. But the idea that he's saying is an idea that's objectively true, and you'll always be able to show rather clearly, and this is what the Aveda is in learning Ramban and the Chumash, is showing how the Medrash that he's quoting is supporting the Pshat that he's saying.
Interesting.
And also the Kabbalah will also support the Pshat, interestingly enough. Even though I want you to know that information that's in the Kabbalah, but it also supports the Pshat, the way it's reading the word. Now Rashi does that sometimes. Right? Sometimes Rashi will bring a Pshat, and then he'll bring a Medrash. You wonder why does he bring the Medrash? Sometimes Rashi's Medrash supports his Pshat. The example that springs to mind is, what does it say in the pasuk? Right, Sari Menu, after she's told that she's going to have a baby, so she says, Kol Shemea Yitzchak li. Anybody who hears will now, simple pshat is laugh at me. Right? Because Yitzchak is laugh. So that's a bizarre thing for Sarah to say. Like what Sarah cares that people are laughing at her. She's walking around dressed in a way that's probably somewhat different than everybody else. Not a lot, right? Because everybody dressed rather modestly in those days. But she's still walking around in a slightly different way, and her lifestyle is completely different than everybody else. So she certainly doesn't seem to be someone who's trying to curry public favor. So why is she saying Kol Shemea Yitzchak? So Rashi says Yismach alai. They'll be happy on my account. Okay, so in other words, the word Yitzchak doesn't mean laugh. It means happy. They'll be happy, and li doesn't mean at me or to me, but on account of me. So Yitzchak is Yismach, and li is alai. That's how Rashi translates those words. So that makes much more sense in terms of Sarah, Beseder, but I mean, so that's very nice, but that isn't what the word said. Rashi then quotes a Medrash. And the Medrash says that on that day that Sarah gave birth, all pregnant women, all sorts of barren women became pregnant, all sorts of sick people got well, all sorts of blind people could see. The last four words in the Medrash are, in general, joy was in the world. Okay, according to the Medrash, what do those two words mean? Everybody who hears, what do they mean according to the Medrash? They'll laugh at me?
No.
That what?
No, they'll be
happy on my account. All these wonderful things are happening to them because of me. So in other words, the Medrash is reading those words, Yismach alai. It's not pshat. That's not what she's saying. Right? So Rashi doesn't bring it as pshat, but Rashi does bring it as a support for the way he read the words. Because he wants support to read the words properly, because he said what Rashi's opinion is that what Rashi says doesn't matter. Rashi's opinion is what Chazal say matters. That's why Rashi's opinion matters to us. Because Rashi's opinion doesn't matter to Rashi. People's opinion matter to themselves. Don't worry about those people so much. Don't listen to those people so much. They usually don't say the truth. People who aren't so into themselves, those people you can usually trust them.
Is there anywhere else in the Torah where it uses those words to describe other people will be happy for me?
No. Doesn't have to be. There's a Medrash Chazal, which is as good as the Torah, like Torah Shebal Peh. So that's why Rashi quotes that Medrash. Right? Mm-hmm. Classic example of Rashi doing what the Ramban does on almost every pasuk that he explains. Often the Ramban will quote Rashi, because the Ramban in his poem at the beginning of his commentary on the Torah, so he says that there's going to be two lights that are going to guide him in this enterprise of writing a perush in the Torah, Rashi and the Ibn Ezra. Those are the two perushim he's going to look at to guide him through same shot in the Torah. He says, Rashi, loy mishpata bechora. He has the law of the firstborn. And then he says that he'll deal with his words with love. Then he says, the Ibn Ezra, tochacham megula va'ahava masutara. Open rebuke and hidden love. He never says anything harsh to Rashi or about Rashi. Now, that doesn't mean he agrees with Rashi, but he never calls Rashi names. Other people, He calls the Ibn Ezra an idiot walking in the darkness. Right? It's like an idiot walking in the darkness with this parish that he said. Absolute nonsense. Right? So he says at the beginning, don't worry, there'll be open rebuke, but also hidden love. He's not you're learning you or I, is he? He's learning the Ibn Ezra. So obviously he thinks the Ibn Ezra is a pretty serious parish on the Torah. That doesn't mean he agrees with it in everything, but he thinks he's pretty serious. So he calls the Rambam Karov L'Kfira. This is almost a blasphemy. Right? That's the way the Rishonim talk to each other. Especially the Sephardi Rishonim had harsh language one for the other, but obviously they were learning each other, so they had great respect for each other. Right? Because I mean, if you're going to learn his parish, you obviously think he's worth the time. So the Ramban will often quote Rashi, and just quote Rashi and say quietly, Zehu Medrasha, this is the Medrash, Upshute, and the Pshat's like this. I mean, Rashi said a very nice thing, it's just not Pshat. Right? And we're saying Pshat here. Okay. And Rashi says that he's saying Pshat. Rashi, when he quotes him 3 times in Bereshis, Rashi quotes Medrash and says, but I came only to say Pshat, not to bring Medrash in, etc. Okay, so our question is on Rashi. This story is relatively easy to understand. Rashi even says that. Kipshutai, simple pshat. Right? Context. Read it in context. Why was he afraid? Well, he was afraid that this thing was known. It says in the next verse. He was afraid in the next half of the verse. He was afraid that this thing was known. Okay. But Rashi also brings a medrash and says the fear was, I'm afraid they aren't fit for Geula because they're not getting along. And Shachein Noida Davar, once he said that about the words fear, so then what do the words Shachein Noida Davar mean according to that understanding? Oh, that maybe, and now something makes sense to me that I never understood. Why are the Jews enslaved? Because they're not getting along. Why did Rashi bring all this? What did he need this for? Why not just say Kipshuta? Or say nothing? The verse is completely understood. V'yesh lemer abir b'zeh. One could say the beer is like this, bepashtus, simply. Right? The Rebbe is going to give one beer and then explain something based on a second. Kavanas Rashi he, right? And this is something really fascinating, especially today. But it's fascinating since Rashi, but I mean even more today. Kavanas Rashi he liyashev keshi klali because of that. The intention of Rashi liyashev to settle, Koshi Klali, a general difficulty because of in this pasuk. And what's that difficulty? L'may nafkamina. What difference does it make? Prat zeh, this detail, the hasipur, in the story of what? V'yira Moshe, that Moshe was afraid, v'yemer chen neida hadavar, and he said this thing is known. Rashi the Rebbe asks very interesting, points out something that's very, very fascinating. The Torah does not tell us about people's emotions. It's not interested in their emotions. It's interested in what they're saying and what they're doing. What they're feeling, the Torah just doesn't discuss their feelings. Right? My goodness, what an insensitive book. Right? God's just not woke. Doesn't he understand that it's all about feelings? Right? Now you can't read an op-ed in a major newspaper, which I don't read anyway, but I mean, anytime I ever see them, no one says, I think, they say, I feel that. What do you feel that? Well, okay, what do you feel that? That's your subjective reality. What's that got to do with me? Tell me what you think. That's objective. That might have something to do with me. What you feel, that's your feelings, which is very nice. You're entitled to them and you should have them and enjoy them or whatever, but it has nothing to do with me, right? Because I'm not you. Feelings are subjective. Emotion is subjective reality, right? Now, obviously, I have emotions for other people and care about the emotions of other people, but if someone's writing an article and I've never met them in my life, their feelings are completely and totally irrelevant to me. The only thing that has anything to do with my life is their objective understanding of a particular reality that might arouse in me an interest. Oh, that's a very interesting idea, that well. I feel. So feel good, okay, that's very good. I'm glad you feel. That's not, what does that got to do with me? It's you. Don't vomit yourself all over the page. Just tell me what you think, which is something that might have something to do with my objective reality. Meaning it's not my objective reality that I'm also dealing with. Subjective, I feel, okay, say, feelings are fine, there should be feelings. We're commanded to have certain feelings, certain emotions called love and fear, no question. But so the Torah never tells us about people's emotions, unless, in order to understand what they did, I have to understand their emotion. What's an example of that? Fairly recently, that it would be nice if you remember. Fairly recently, in the Chumash. Doesn't tell us their emotions. It says they cried. Doesn't tell us their emotions. Actually, it's very interesting. You might think they were crying because of an emotional outburst. No, Rashi says exactly the opposite. They were crying because of objective information that they knew.
Was it Yosef when he heard his brothers talking?
Oh, that's interesting, Taka. We find Yosef crying. That's Taka interesting. We find Yosef isn't able to hold back the emotion of crying. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, 100%. Okay, that means he has to leave. Yeah. But that's very interesting. So why am I told about his emotion? Because he left the room. Right. Okay. What else? More famous. Says explicitly. Someone was once afraid. Who was afraid? What?
Yaakov.
Yaakov. And what did he do?
What?
Split up his camp and he prepared for war and he said, why are we told Yaakov was afraid of Esau? Because everything he did was a result of his fear, right? So it's not a chiddush to tell me that he was afraid, right? I mean, I'm told he was afraid so that I'll understand everything that he did. He prepared for war, he davened, he split up his camp, he sent a doron, he sent a matana, a present to Esau, right? The reason he did all this was because he was afraid. Here, if Moshe's fear produced an action, then what action should it have produced? What should he have done if he was afraid? What?
Ran away.
Run away, b'diuk. What did he do? Well, okay, but what did he do? Actually, what you're saying is true, but I mean...
Prepared for war.
No, he didn't prepare for war. Moshe Rabbeinu?
Looked around.
That's after he killed the
Didn't
guy.
he go back to the...
He went back to Pharaoh's palace, right? He went home. Didn't he go home? What happened later? He went home. Pharaoh heard, wanted to kill him, and then what happened? Then he ran away. But if his fear produced a response, it should have produced a response to run away. If you're afraid, so run away. Didn't run away. He went home. So then why am I being told he was afraid? For what in the world is the use of this idea that Moshe was afraid? The Torah does not tell me. Moshe Rabbeinu went up the mountain to accept the Torah. Do you assume that there were certain emotions that Moshe Rabbeinu was feeling at that moment? I would assume so, right? Pretty exciting moment in his life, right? The fulfillment of everything he's been doing for the last year and a half. Well, not a year. Yeah, pretty close. Year plus. Right? The Makkahs took a year. Every Makkah was a week, then there was a week off, then there was a couple of weeks of warning, and then another Makkah. So the first, about 9 months. Meaning, we got out of Egypt on Pesach, obviously. From Rosh Hashanah that year, we were already not working. Slavery was over as of Rosh Hashanah. We weren't being enslaved. Meaning, we weren't working in the fields and being beaten up. Fine, okay, from Rosh Hashanah. So Moshe was in Egypt for about a year plus. Right, and then we got out. Right, so and clearly, based on these midrashim, since he was a little kid, Moshe was worrying about the Gula of the Jewish people based on this. Right, it's really interesting. Moshe, 15, what's he thinking about? Gula, according to the midrashim. Right, okay, so you would imagine there were some pretty powerful emotions as he's walking up that mountain to go get the Torah. Not a word. Not a word in the Torah, completely irrelevant. That's Moshe, and that's Moshe's relationship with Moshe, and Moshe's relationship with the Eibishter, and that has nothing to do, it's not our business. Manyan, no? I mean, if someone was writing the novel, it would all be about Moshe's emotions, right? Someone did write a novel, right? And wrote complete untruths about the emotions of Yosef in the boar. Right? that Yosef had emotions in the bore, and what did he say? I hate my brothers, blah, blah. Absolute nonsense. Complete and total non-truth. Might make for a good novel, I don't know. But complete and total non-truth. Some German writer named Thomas Mann.
Thomas
Whose name
Mann,
you don't have to remember anymore.
It doesn't, when we talk about history, there's historical books on history.
Those are what usually historical books are about, Doc. Historical books are about
I'm
history.
getting to something else.
I know,
You're right.
I know,
right.
I know.
That
I'm just picking on you.
Oh, that's all right. That's all right. Yeah, I got it. Thank you. Thank you for. I know it was meant to be constructive. Thank you.
You're sounding like Kamala Harris now. I mean,
Oh my God!
Historical
I'm
books
not
on
gonna talk
history.
for 6 months if you don't want me to talk.
No, I do want you to talk.
No.
I just.
So, okay, being objective, historians like to be objective. When they start talking about people's feelings, it becomes a historical fiction. So doesn't that say that the Torah is history and not historical fiction, which should be making it more acceptable as truth?
Yeah, but what you're saying is true, in objective terms. But objective terms, people are mostly allergic to objective terms today. So it's hard to, but what you're saying is right. Okay.
I gotta go to my safe room now.
No, don't go to your safe. Stay out here. Stay out here. There's pudding for breakfast, don't worry. There's usually pudding for breakfast. I'm sure Dita Matzach, there'll be pudding for breakfast. Okay. So the idea of Moshe's fear is very interesting, right? The fear is the fact that the Torah talks about Moshe's fear itself is worthy of note, because that's not what the Torah does. Right? And the fact that the Rebbe points that out to us is very educational. Yirazu loy garma l'shum ma'isa. This fear didn't produce any action. Again, if Moshe had run away, I understand it. Say Moshe was afraid and he ran away. It makes perfect sense. Of course, you should tell me that. Why did he run away? Why is he running away? Oh, because he was afraid, because people knew. Okay, I get it. But he didn't run away. He went home, back to the palace. He didn't go to Midian. But only after Paro heard about it, Ubikesh Laharga and wanted to kill him, which is in the pasuk, but only afterwards. How long did that take? I don't know. However long it took. Now the Rebbe says parenthetically, Ve'ein lahakshes, don't ask Cain this same question. Al kol sipur Moshe v'dasan v'avira. Don't ask the same question about the whole story. You could theoretically ask those questions. Why is this story in the Chumash? Like, what in the world does this story add to my understanding as to what's going on in the Torah? Let it be a medrash. This story. There's all sorts of stories that happen that aren't in the Torah. They're in midrashim, right? So let this be in Torah about that. Why do I have to hear this story about Moshe walking out and seeing? The pasuk could have simply written, told, Rak v'yishma paray al derech harigas mitzri, meaning he's talking about the Dasan Aviram part of the story, right? Meaning the fact that Moshe killed the Mitzri, so that part of the story we have to know. Why do we have to know that part of the story?
To know why he leaves.
To know why he left, right? Because he ran away, because Paro wanted to kill him, because he did that. But what do I care about his conversation with Dasan Aviram the next day? Who cares? Which produced this fear, right? So you could theoretically say, well, just say Moshe looked here and there, killed the Mitzri, Paro heard, and Moshe ran away. What do I need Dasan Aviram? I understand. Our question was, what do I need Moshe's fear as a response to the conversation with Dasan Aviram? The Rebbe is now asking, you say, don't ask why you need this whole story. Why not? Because you do need the whole story. Why do you need the story? So let's see. Theoretically, the pasuk could have said, "L'saper rak v'yishma paray al davar harigas hamitzri," regarding the matter of killing the Egyptian. V'yivrak Moshe ran away. V'kol l'sipor, this is still part of the question. V'kol l'sipor oide shnei anashim ivrim nitzim, these two Jews that were fighting. Sha'amnu l'Moshe, that they said to Moshe, "Mi samcha shevet lehu." Who put you as a judge upon us? How again you're going to kill me like you killed the Mitzri? Lamali. What do I need that whole story for? Oh, so the Rebbe says v'yeshlem. You could say shezem muvan. It's understood al pi Perish Rashi, based on the Perish Rashi v'yishma Paro. How did Paro hear about this? Dasan Aviram. Hey, Milshinu Allah. Dasan Aviram went to Paro and said, "You know that little Jew boy living in your palace killed a Mitzri yesterday." Now this is very interesting, right? Moshe's been living in the palace for 10, 12 years, 13 years. I mean, when did he stop nursing? Generally, we stop nursing at latest 24 months. A mother is considered a nursing mother for 24 months, even if she's not nursing. She can, in terms of not fasting on certain fast days, etc., etc. Okay, fine. So 24 months he was with his mother. Obviously, he tried to keep him there as long as possible to keep him out of the palace. Okay. So Bisya came to take him when he was 2 years old. Now he's 14, 15, 16, something along those lines. So it's been 12 years, 13 years, 14 years. He's been living in Paro's palace as the adopted son of his beloved daughter. Manyen. You would think if Paro heard that he killed a Mitzri, what would he say? Big deal. So what? How many? Right? How many did you kill, Moshe? How'd you do it? You got 3 with 1 arrow? Good job, Moshe. I'm proud of you. That's my boy. Interesting, no? You killed a Mitzri, you Jew? He's still a Jew 13 years later, living in this guy's house. It's so interesting. It's a crazy part of the story. There was no one talks about it. It's just a crazy part of the story. That's, okay, fine. Paro hears that he killed a Mitzri from Dasan and Aviram. Why? We want to know, how did Paro hear? Paro heard because of the whole conversation with Dasan and Aviram. If Dasan and Aviram, that conversation hadn't taken place, who says they would have gone to Paro to say that Moshe killed a Mitzri? But as soon as that conversation took place and they were not so happy with Moshe Rabbeinu, so they went to Paro and said, "I just want you to know that Moshe, that nice little boy, has been living in your house for 13 years. He killed a Mitzri yesterday." So Paro said, "Take Moshe out and chop off his head." Well, that's what he tried to do, right? That's the Medrash. The Medrash says that when they brought the axe down on Moshe's neck, so the axe broke and Moshe got up and ran away. Right?
Where, what if they told Paro that Moshe was also Jewish? So then that would have caused, he's a Jew and he's killing a Mitzri.
I would assume that Paro probably knew. I would assume, because Bisya knew. His daughter knew.
Right.
She knew who he was. Right? Now, how close were they at that point is not so clear. I hear you. I mean, we can get into all sorts of conjecture as to what happened with the whole thing. But it was just interesting that he's growing up in the palace for the last 13 years, but that doesn't seem to mean anything, right? But Bisya did tshuva, right? She left behind the Avodah Zarah of her father. So how close was she to her father at that point? Who knows, right? I mean, how are we supposed to know these things? She went to the river to Tevel, so to leave behind the Avodah Zarah. Okay. But she knew he was Jewish. She says she knew he was Jewish. A Jewish girl took her away to her mother to nurse. He wouldn't nurse with any of the Egyptian nursemaids that were with Bisya, right? He wouldn't suckle. So then she said, "Well, what am I going to do?" So that's when Miriam said, "Well, maybe I'll take him to someone who can nurse him." So he was with his mother for the next however long. And then she came to get, I would imagine she probably even went to visit him now and then. I don't know. I mean, did she? I would assume so, right? She's very interested in this young boy. She relates to him as her adopted son. So what? She just didn't show up for 2 years and then one day came, "Okay, I came to get him." I mean, maybe, but I would imagine she showed up now and then. Probably kissed the mezuzah on the door as she walked in. I don't know. I mean, I would assume. I mean, these are all parts of the story that aren't written anywhere, right? I mean, something was happening.
So the Pharaoh heard the conversation between.
Pharaoh,
He heard the conversation between.
No, they came to Paro and said Moshe killed a Jew, Mitzvah.
Who is Dustin of Urim?
Dustin and Aviram are two creeps who show up in the Torah over and over again, causing trouble, and ultimately meet their end in the rebellion of Korach. They're part of that too. Right? That's Dustin and Aviram. Now, what's really astounding? Dustin and Aviram, who are, creeps derisa, so they made it out of Egypt. Right? They're part of the 20% that made it out. Can you imagine what the other 80% were like? If they made it out?
Wow.
They were enough with Moshe Rabbeinu to say, okay, we'll take a chance with Moshe. We'll see what happens. 80% of the Jews, at least, right? There's three positions in the Medrash. One that's crazy, one that's crazier, and one that's just wild. Okay, one says 1 in 50, the other says 1 in 5. That's what Rashi brings in Chumash. 1 in 50, 1 in 500. 1 in 500. One out of every 500 Jews made it out of Egypt. So how many Yidden were in Egypt? 1.5 billion, according to that Medrash. All right? The Rebbe quotes that Medrash. Says hard Medrash to understand. Says how can we understand it? Hard for us to understand. But there's one thing we can understand about it. Right? That when Moshe Rabbeinu comes and says the Geula is happening, it might be only 1 in 5 people believe him. It might be only 1 in 50 people believe him. It might be only 1 in 500 people believe him. Be that one. Our generation, Moshe Rabbeinu, this is day to day. This is Yud-Tes Kislev of our generation. Right? Okay. He said it was coming. Are we with him? We believe him? Are we 1 in 5, 1 in 50, 1 in 500? Are we part of the 500, part of the 499, part of the 49, part of the 4? I don't know. We have to make that decision.
Yeah.
But he said, Moshe was saying something as seemingly crazy as Mashiach is coming. We're going to get out of Egypt? Oh, give me a break. No one gets out of Egypt. No one ever got out of Egypt. There was no such thing. Right? Okay. So there were enough Yidden that believed Moshe. There were 3 million of them that packed up and went with him.
But doesn't the Rebbe say that the difference between the leaving of Mitzrayim versus Mashiach coming now is that when Mashiach comes now, all the Jews,
for sure,
Jewish soul is going to be
absolutely 100%, 100%.
But saying that you should think that you're like one.
You have to be one. You have to be one of the ones who's busy trying to make it happen, as opposed to one of the ones who's thinking, "Oh, come on, that's ridiculous. Let me just, put on my tefillin and get my Elam Haba and work in my villa in Gan Eden." Every time I put on tefillin, I get another meter in Gan Eden. And the view gets a little better. Look at it that way, or look at it a slightly different way. No, hold on. Every time we put on tefillin, we're bringing Mashiach a little closer. All right, we'll talk about it tonight, I assume. I don't know. You never know what you're going to talk about. But Rabbi Kaplan, the day of Hey Davis, so when there's obviously a big, they were for Brangens in 770 for the next week. The pictures of them bringing boxes of Smirnoffs into 770 on those things that they, those trolley things, right? Bringing them here. Rabbi Kaplan said a true thing. He said that every mitzvah tefillin that anybody did, and this was right after Hanukkah, right? Davis, all of the mitzvahim of Hanukkah, anytime anybody did anything that was shaykh to bringing another Yid closer to Yiddishkeit, every single action they did helped a little bit in the trial and brought about a positive verdict in the trial. Everything everybody did. Well, there's absolutely, for 100% what he said is true. Okay. And we'll talk about it tonight. What was it all about? The family intrigue is too depressing, and it's not something that we have to talk about. But what was really going on? Because the Rebbe said very, very clearly, this is not about a particular person. This is clearly about some sort of accusation above that was done away with. Okay, so what was the accusation, and how was it done away with? Right? Yud-Tes Kislev. It's partially Yud-Tes Kislev. This is the Yud-Tes Kislev of our generation. Right? Remember that Rabbi Paltiel was for bringing once. He said that someone came up to him and asked, "Do you say Tachman on Hey Davis?" So And that Rabbi Paltiel is a very calm guy. Right? He said, I got very upset. So you say Tachnan on Yud Tes Kislev? I said, you should say Tachnan on 8 Davis. You say Tachnan. You should fast. You say Tachnan on Yud Tes Kislev. This is our Yud Tes Kislev. This is what we saw. We saw Yud Tes Kislev.
I should read it. We don't say Tachnan.
We don't say Tachnan. I'm davening from the Amba today. You're not going to hear Tachnan. It's my father's yahrzeit today, so I will be davening from the Amba. Then you'll also have some treats after davening.
The Shona should have an aliyah.
Oh, mate, thank you very much. He was a good guy. So Hamil Shinu Olav. They told about it, so that's why we need that story. We have to know how Das and Reviim are part of this whole story. Vanim, so therefore it's found. Shebezeh misaper. This is the reason that the Chumash tells a Kosev, the Pasuk, Ketzad Igir Shmuzu LaParo. How did this come to Paro? That they did. About Ein Zeh Matar, it's a My Sipur Kosev, Al Derech Yirasu, Al Davar Yirasu. But this doesn't teach us why the Pasuk tells us about Moshe's fear. V'lochem, therefore, Mevi Rashi Perish and Medrash, therefore Rashi brings the Perish and Medrash, Rashi says it's important that the pasuk wants us. This is our pipshat in Rashi. The Rebbe is going to say a whole different. There's going to be a whole different mahalach in this whole story in a second. But first, the Rebbe just says simple pshat. Why did Rashi bring the medrashim? Because the medrashim teach us important information about Moshe's fear, and the Eibishter wanted you and I to understand this about Moshe Rabbeinu at this point in his career. What was Moshe afraid of, according to the Medrash? Geula. The Geula not happening. B'diuk. That's who Moshe Rabbeinu is. That's who Moshe is. That's what he's all about. That's what he's always all about. It's not something that happened at the snare. It's something that was Moshe's life. As soon he was big enough to notice what was going on. Right? Okay, and the Torah wants to tell us that, so the Torah tells us about his fear. Even though in Snef, the Torah tells us about a fear in such a way that al pi pshat, you can't get this information, but you can only get the information al derech drush, in non-contextually. But Rashi says it's so important that we have to hear this, because the whole idea of teaching us about Moshe's fear was to teach us this. Okay, fine, that's pshat, but Rashi goes on, the Rebbe goes on. He, cave and chain mikra yetzi midei pshutei. That since the pasuk doesn't go out from its contextual meaning we just explain why there's a medrash, but what's the pshat in this pasuk? Right? Ubefrat b'nidoin didan, especially in our case, nidoin didan, our situation. Like didan, what does didan mean? Ours. No, not so. Didan, not so. The song we're going to sing a lot in the next 20 hours. Right, people are going to bench. Everybody's going to sing. No, they're not going to. Don't worry. But it is the song. It's the song that we sing a lot. It is the song of today. 8 Davis is Dida Natzach. From the Rebbe, because of the Rebbe. The Rebbe said a Sicha about the Indian of Dida Natzach. He told us the Medrash about Dida Natzach. It's a Medrash. Shalei zu bilvad, that not only Shaloi Histapek Rashi, not only did Rashi not suffice but Perish Medrash by just quoting the Medrash. Rashi could have just said, Medrash says like this. Ella what? Oid Makdim, he preceded the Medrash with Kipshutei, with the words Kipshutei. Meaning Rashi said, Kipshutei, there's a pshat in this pasuk. So Al Pi Pshat, why are we told about the fear? Lifnei Medrash, that's before he quoted the Medrash. Al Kain Tzarech Lemer, therefore it's necessary to say, or it might be Al Kerchach, you're forced to say. Shegam Lefi Perish HaPashut, even according to the contextual meaning, the V'yira Moshe, Shayara L'nafshe, he was afraid for himself. He was afraid he was going to get killed. Mipnei Shenoida Hadavar Sharagas, because it's now known, this thing, that he killed the Egyptian. Yesh Bir V'tam, that even according to that, there must be a beer, there must be an explanation and a reason. Al kol pachas, at least al derech adrush, meaning we're going to be able to say a drasha on the pshat, lekach she'inyan zen nemar b'kosav. Okay, now I just want to see this medrash and then we'll stop. V'yesh lahakdim divrei medrash. Rashi is going to, the Rebbe is going to quote a medrash. The medrash talks about people having fear. Two people, Yaakov and Moshe, fearing something. And there's a machlokes in the medrash, and there's a machlokes in the mefarshim medrash, whether this fear is something that they are being complimented regarding, or is this fear something they're being chastised regarding? Is fear positive or negative in this whole story? Not in our story, right? In the medrash. V'yesh la'akdim divrei medrash. Al haposik v'yira Yaakov ma'od v'yitzei. This is Yaakov by Esav, right? Which was brought up earlier, because that's when we find out that he was afraid, and therefore he did all those things that he did. So that fear, we have no problem, I'll peep shot, why we're being told that he was afraid. Because the fear is telling us, it's explaining to us why it is he then split up his camp and sent a daughter in and prepared for war and davened, etc. Okay. Rabbi Pinchas b'shem Rabbi Reuven. Rabbi Pinchas b'shem Rabbi Reuven. This is a medrash in Breshis Rabbah. On the pasuk there. Shnei b'nei Adam. Two people. Hivtichan HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The HaKadosh Baruch Hu promised them that everything will be okay. V'nis yaidu. And they were afraid. Habachur sheba'avis, the chosen of the Avis. V'abachur shebenavim, and the chosen of the Navim, meaning the greatest of the Avis and the greatest of the Navim. Habachur sheba'avis, the chosen of the Avis, ze Yaakov. V'amar le'akadosh Baruch Hu, hine anochi imach, I'm with you. Don't worry, everything's okay. U'b'seif, and yet at the end, Nishara, he was afraid. Shenemar v'yiro Yaakov. Yaakov was afraid when he encountered Esav. Habachur shebenavim, the chosen of the Navim, ze Moshe. Va'amar le'akadosh Baruch Hu, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said in Mitzrayim, ki imach, I'm going to be with you. Don't worry. At that point, he was afraid of Paro, right? He said, who am I going to talk to Paro? He was also afraid, interesting enough, based on what we already learned, and this is one of the reasons why Al Pip Shat, Rashi quoted this medrash. What does Moshe say at the sneh? Who am I to go to Egypt and take them out of, who am I to go to Paro and take them out of Egypt? And Rashi says that Moshe is asking two questions. Who am I to go to Paro, meaning how am I going to go to Paro? And take them out of Egypt? Who says they are worthy of going out of Egypt? Now that's perfectly in line with what we just learned in our medrash, right? So that medrash is really setting up pshat later on in the Torah, and by the snare when Moshe Rabbeinu asks, who says that they're worthy? Because after all, what was the last thing Moshe saw before he left Egypt 65 years before? Two Yidden fighting, and then?
Those seem to basically put a blame on him.
Well, they went to Paro and said it's not blame. They told Paro that he killed a Mitzri. They went and said Lashon Hara about Moshe Rabbeinu to Paro, so that Paro would kill him. Okay, so that was the last scene that Moshe saw in the Jewish life in Mitzrayim. So Moshe wasn't so sure. And based on the medrash that Rashi quotes, it makes perfect sense now. Okay. So that's the pshat. But there's this medrash is going to say a different pshat. The Eibusher says, "I'll be with you. Don't worry." Now, the simple pshat in that is it's relative to Paro. But if you take it out of context, I mean that's not so much out of context. It's relative to everything that happens to Moshe for the next 40 years. It isn't so difficult understanding it that way. Ulu b'seif, and in the end, Nisyara, he was afraid. And what's the fear of Moshe? V'yemer Hashem al Moshe. Hashem said to Moshe, Al tiro, don't be afraid of him. Who's him? Og Melech HaBashan. Later on in Bamidbar, when they run into Og Melech HaBashan, who's a big guy, right? So the Eibusher says, don't be afraid of him. So the fact that the Eibusher says, don't be afraid of him, what does that seem to indicate? That Moshe was afraid of him, and that's exactly what it said. Eino Eimer Al, that ayin should be an aleph. Eino Eida Al Tiro, you don't say, don't be afraid of him. Elo Lamisha Nishyara. That's someone who's afraid. Oh, so that's the medrash. The medrash says that the Eibusher told two people, I'll be with you, and yet they were still afraid.
What ayin should be an aleph?
That Eino Eimer Al Tiro. That ayin should be Al. Don't. Not on. Okay. Right? Like it is at the very beginning of the line. Same. Right? I don't know how that snuck in there. It doesn't make. Okay, so that's the medrash. Now we're going to see. I doubt tomorrow morning we will see probably on Tuesday morning, we will see the fact that there's a machlokes mefarshei ha-medrash as to whether or not this medrash is complimenting Moshe and Yaakov, that even though they were promised, still they were very humble, and they thought, the phrase is Shema Gadam Achet, they thought perhaps I've done something wrong in the interim and I don't deserve the fulfillment of the promise. That's one derech in the medrash, that they're being praised for their humility. The other derech in the medrash is they're being chastised. They shouldn't have been afraid. Oh, okay. So the Rebbe is going to explain the second. What do you mean? Why is it not reasonable to say? Again, you're going to have to remember three words. We'll see it inside. You don't have to remember them yet, but we'll see them inside. Shema Garam Achet. Lest the sin caused. What did the sin cause? It caused me not to be worthy of the fulfillment of the promise. The humility that perhaps in the interim, since I was promised, I've done something such that I'm no longer worthy of the fulfillment of the promise. Why is that not a reasonable position? According to the other day in the Medrash, no, they're being chastised. So I understand, why is it not reasonable to say Shema Garam Achet? That's the question that everybody's going to spend the whole rest of the Sicha explaining. Okay. We'll see it then.
What was the machloket?
We'll see it inside. We'll see it inside on the next time we meet.
It was then